The void was not merely empty. It was a heavy, absolute silence that stretched across infinity. There was no movement. There was no time. There was only the weight of an eternal, unyielding dark. Then, the stillness broke. A single, microscopic point of pressure ignited. It did not flicker. It tore through the fabric of the nothingness with a soundless, blinding intensity. The spark expanded, doubling in size, then doubling again, consuming the surrounding shadow. It was a violent birth of heat. The darkness tried to hold its ground, pressing inward against the growing light. But the heat pushed back, carving out a sphere of radiance. The temperature spiked, turning the cold vacuum into a furnace of pure energy. This was the first star. It pulsed, a rhythmic, golden anchor. The shadows retreated, pushed to the very edges of existence. The universe had begun, and the darkness was no longer absolute. The star burned, a beacon of stability amidst the swirling chaos of the wake. Beyond its golden reach, the remnants of the creation event drifted in a vast, jagged ring. Dust, gas, and frozen rock tumbled through the dark, colliding in slow, silent impacts. Then, the invisible pull began. Gravity reached out, a relentless tether drawing the scattered debris into tighter, denser orbits. Small clusters of stone and ice slammed together, shattering on contact only to fuse again under the crushing weight of their own mass. The collisions grew frequent, turning the debris field into a grinding, chaotic forge. Larger fragments acted as anchors, pulling in everything that drifted too close. The erratic motion slowed as the material settled into spheres, smoothing out the jagged edges of the early chaos. These were the first planets, raw and molten, spinning in the cold light of their parent star. The cosmic wreckage had found its form, marking the end of the initial, frantic expansion. The surface of the new world was a jagged, cooling shell of basalt and iron. Deep beneath this hardening crust, trapped gases and intense heat fought for release. The pressure mounted, pushing against the stone until the ground groaned and finally fractured. Massive fissures tore across the landscape, and from these deep, glowing veins, thick plumes of white steam erupted into the sky. The vapor rose, cooling rapidly as it climbed, thickening into dense, dark curtains that blotted out the starlight. The atmosphere grew heavy, saturated with the weight of the trapped moisture. Then, the first drop fell. It struck the hot rock with a sharp hiss, followed instantly by another, and then a relentless, steady downpour. The water did not just fall. It attacked the barren surface. It pooled in the cracks, surged over the ridges, and began to cut deep, winding channels into the stone. The dry, static rock was suddenly alive with movement. The rain gathered speed, turning into rushing torrents that scoured the slopes. Where there had been only dead, silent stone, now there was the sound of running water. The landscape was being reshaped, carved by the relentless force of the falling sky. The rivers did not stop. They carried the dissolved minerals and salts of the broken crust, pouring them into the vast, hollow basins of the lowlands. The water slowed, losing its frantic energy as it spread across the flat, barren plains. It pooled, rising inch by inch, day by day, until the depressions were swallowed by the rising tide. The first oceans were born, vast sheets of dark, mineral-rich water that stretched toward the horizon. Beneath the surface, the turbulence faded into a deep, rhythmic pulse. The water was heavy, thick with the chemistry of the earth, a silent cradle waiting for a spark. In the deepest, quietest pockets of the basin, the water shifted. A change occurred that no eye could see. Within the chemical soup, the first microscopic chains of matter began to vibrate. They did not just drift, they reacted. They pulled in the surrounding nutrients, splitting and reforming in the dark, cool depths. These tiny, invisible entities moved with a purpose that the stone and water lacked. In the vast, silent expanse of the early world, life had finally found its footing, drifting through the currents, waiting for the long, slow climb toward the light. The tide retreated, leaving the damp, nutrient-rich silt exposed to the harsh glare of the sun. In the shallow, receding pools, the first organisms were stranded. They did not retreat with the water. Instead, they clung to the wet sediment, their structures hardening against the drying air. This was the first bridge between the deep and the dry. They pushed forward, dragging their mass over the slick, cooling mud, finding purchase where only stone had existed before. The transition was brutal. Many withered under the direct heat, but those that remained began to draw energy directly from the light. They anchored themselves into the soil, weaving roots into the cracks of the earth. From these small, persistent anchors, the world began to change its color. Stems pushed upward, thickening into stalks that reached for the sky. Giant ferns unfurled their fronds, catching the moisture from the air. The earth was no longer a silent, barren expanse. It was a breathing, growing forest, a vast carpet of green that stretched from the coast to the heart of the land. The green canopy was not meant to last in stillness. Deep beneath the roots, the bedrock began to groan. The tectonic plates, which had drifted in silence for eons, finally locked against one another. The pressure became absolute. At first, it was only a tremor, a vibration that shook the ferns and sent dust rising from the soil. Then, the earth began to scream. Stone ground against stone with a force that shattered the foundations of the continents. The flat plains buckled, folding under the immense weight. Where there had been level ground, the earth now surged upward, forced by the relentless heat from the core. Massive slabs of rock tore through the surface. The ferns were crushed, buried beneath landslides of gravel and pulverized shale. The ground tilted, then broke, creating deep, jagged fissures. The sky seemed to descend as the mountains climbed to meet it, their peaks sharpening into cold, barren spires of granite. The earth was scarred, raw, and newly forged, standing as a testament to the immense, crushing power of the world beneath the surface. The mountains stood silent, but the shadows between the crags were no longer empty. From the deep fissures, creatures crawled into the light. They were lean, built for speed and the jagged terrain. The first hunt began in the high passes. A low, guttural growl echoed off the granite, followed by the frantic scramble of claws on stone. The world was suddenly loud. Every movement triggered a reaction. Every snap of a twig signaled a life or death decision. They built nests in the sheltered hollows, scraping together debris to protect their young from the thinning air. But the environment offered no long-term peace. The sun began its erratic climb, and the air turned brittle. The first frost coated the peaks, turning the green valleys into frozen traps. Then, the heat returned, scorching the lowlands and drying the streams to dust. This cycle of seasons forced a frantic pace upon every living thing. They had to store, migrate, and fight to survive the shifting extremes. The hunt became constant, a desperate rhythm of pursuit and evasion. Life refused to be contained by the high-altitude frost. It pushed upward, colonizing the very summits where the air was too thin for most to breathe. Mosses clung to the granite, and winged creatures rode the thermal currents above the clouds, their cries piercing the silence of the peaks. But the expansion did not stop at the surface. Life dove into the dark, crushing weight of the deepest oceanic trenches. In the absolute black, where sunlight never reached, bioluminescent organisms ignited the water with pulses of cold, rhythmic light. They drifted in the currents, feeding on the mineral-rich vents that spewed heat from the planet's core. The world was now a web of interconnected activity. From the highest peaks to the lowest floor of the sea, every square inch of the globe vibrated with growth. The silence of the void had been completely erased, replaced by a chaotic, vibrant symphony. Millions of heartbeats pulsed in unison with the shifting of the tectonic plates. Creatures communicated through song. The planet was no longer a barren rock. It was a living, breathing entity, saturated with the energy of a billion competing and cooperating lives. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, fading shadows across the continents. The roar of the day subsided, replaced by the rhythmic pulse of nocturnal life. This was not the end, but merely a transition in the endless cycle of the world. Beneath the surface, tectonic plates continued their slow, grinding march, reshaping the land in ways invisible to the fleeting eye. Mountains rose by millimeters while the oceans carved deeper into the bedrock, a patient architecture of change that had started with a single spark. The atmosphere swirled, carrying the seeds of future forests across the cooling plains. Life did not pause. It merely shifted its focus, adapting to the cooling air and the rising tide. High above, the stars traced their ancient arcs across the sky, indifferent to the dramas unfolding on the surface below. Yet, the planet remained a vibrant, self-correcting entity. It breathed through its vast forests and pulsed through its deep currents. Every creature, every leaf, and every grain of sand played a role in this unfolding history. The world was a complex machine of biology and geology, turning in the dark, constantly refining itself. It had grown from a void of silence into a masterpiece of movement and light. As the darkness deepened, the earth kept spinning, a living sphere cradled in the vast, starry expanse. The cycle of birth, growth, and transformation continued, an eternal rhythm that would persist long after the current age faded into memory. The spark that once ignited the void had become a permanent, glowing testament to the endurance of existence, forever changing, forever evolving, under the watchful gaze of the infinite cosmos.